Today, Nikon's new Z50 II, why I love it. I'll give you a review, announce setup guides and settings for it, as well as some quick notes on Leica's Q3 firmware 3.11 and a new settings file for that. All right, everybody, it's Hudson, and today is going to mainly be about Nikon Z50 II. I'm going to give you my review of it. We're going to look at some images from it. I'm going to talk about why I like this little camera so much and why I think it would be a great camera for a lot of photographers. We'll talk about who it's for, who it might not be for, and just what's so great about it. But before we jump in and do that, I want to talk just really briefly to the Leica Q3 crowd. I recently did a firmware video and announced a setup or a settings file that you could upload profiles into your own Q3 for firmware 3.0, which is a few months ago. People made note that I hadn't updated the text in the file. Alongside the file, it still said the older firmware version. So before I was about to edit that and fix that clerical error on my website, they announced a new 3.11 firmware version, and it has just some minor autofocus updates, a few settings updates. It's nothing to do a complete video about. You can read about it on Leica's website. But I updated the firmware, redid the settings file, and uploaded it to the website and got all the text right. So if you have your Leica Q3, download firmware 3.11 and run through if you want my settings file, it's up there on the website. You can click right here to go over to my free downloads page. And that's also in this video's full description, and it's got downloads for all the different camera settings there that I do. Also, you know, I have a free settings file for the Z50 II, the new Z50 II. So you'll find a new page on there for Nikon Z50 II with a full settings that you can put onto your memory card and upload into your camera. And that's something that I would suggest you do before watching my full setup video for this camera. I just did 2 videos for this camera. The first is a full, long, comprehensive menu walkthrough where we go through all the settings in the camera and I customize it. And if you put that settings file into your camera and upload it, you can just sort of follow along, and when you see something that's set up differently than makes sense for your particular shooting style, pause the video and change the setting to your taste. It makes it a little less frantic trying to follow along if it's already kind of set up the way it is in the video. The second video, and you can click right here to go over to that video and check it out, the setup video. It's also in this video's full description. The second video is all about how to customize the user mode 3 to be sports, action, and wildlife, and user mode 2 to be landscape. So if you were just knocking around shooting in your manual mode or program or shutter or aperture priority and suddenly you got in an action situation, you just flip to U3 and all your settings would be dialed for that. Same thing with U2 to jump onto the tripod and do some landscape-based work. And you can see how I do that. I'll walk through the whole process right here in the second video, which is much shorter. All right. So let's talk about the Z50 II and why I like this little 24 megapixel body, all right? I know there's a lot of people out there that look at this camera and say, does Nikon really need another 24 megapixel full frame body? They've already got the ZF, which many of you see me using and adoring for the past long number of months. They've already got the Z6 III, which is a speed demon. Why do they need the Z50 II? It's slightly more affordable at $1,700, but what really differentiates it? And I argue that it actually makes more sense than you might think. All right, when they originally launched the Z5 camera, it came with a non-backside illuminated kind of lower tier 24 megapixel sensor that wasn't as good as the Z6 that it was released up against. And I thought, full frame lenses are expensive. You're only saving a few $100 on the sensor. And if it's not as good in low light and doesn't have as great a dynamic range, why would you do it? It'd be much better for you to invest more money in a DX system if you're in that much of a budget that it makes a difference. This camera is different. With the 2, they put the same exact sensor they have in the ZF, the same 24 megapixel backside illuminated sensor that they've been working and perfecting for years now, and it's amazing at high ISO. I set my auto ISO to have a maximum of 20,000, and I don't worry about bumping up against that maximum. Sometimes I set it higher in given situations. And a quick run through Lightroom Classics, enhanced denoise, and you've got a clean, beautiful image. I'll show you that in a minute when we go running through images. People complain, well, maybe 24 megapixels isn't enough in today's day and age, but I think 24 megapixels is a wonderful image size to work with. And in those rare circumstances where you're out there in the field and it's like, wow, this is something I want to be able to print huge. You can set up and capture a panorama, handheld or on the tripod. You can also just make sure you've got a perfectly crafted image, bring it in and run it through up-resing software. I love super resolution that Adobe has in Lightroom Classic built in. And it'll take a 24 megapixel file and spit out a 96 megapixel file. So, those arguments are a little bit more invalid than I would think a lot of people give them credit for. So, before I jump in and talk about who this camera really makes sense for and what are some of the other things I love about it, let's take a look at image quality. Let's jump in and look at some images I created with it. All right, so I have a whole bunch of images here, mostly from a trip to visit my Aunt Stephanie, who lives on the Clackamas River with her dog Ollie. Ollie's sick and isn't doing so well, so we took the kids to visit Ollie, and they've known Ollie since they were tiny. And I thought I'll bring the Z50, the Z5 II along with my 135 Viltrox and my 51.4. And these images are sort of designed to showcase not only how great the Z50 II is with its 24 megapixel sensor, how good it is at high ISO, and the fact that 24 megapixels can be plenty, especially with super resolution. So we'll jump in, we'll go through these images. Here's like the first shot out of the box. Rick happened to be in the studio, and I'm impressed. The little 51.2, the way it renders the out of focus background. The 51.4. Totally different lens, and how it renders the out of focus background and lets you just hone in on what's important, which is Rick's eye, and how it went right through his glasses and really was looking at his eye, which is pretty cool. You can see dust specks on the glasses, but his eye is what's in focus. That's just a JPEG before I'd even set it to RAW. And here's Ollie at Aunt Stephanie's, and showcasing that 51.4 really renders the world nicely. And the Z5 II, snap. Ollie was moving all over and looking around and not giving me much time to pose, and that eye detect autofocus just locked his right eye there. And I really like the bokeh and the fall off here, wide open at 1.4, close up to Ollie with the 50mm lens. Here, that tension between Stacy and my daughter Pepper telling a story, having her Italian soda on the deck. Kind of a lovely spring Oregon day, showers, sun. My aunt has a spectacular backyard leading down to the river. Pepper, again, how lovely is the rendering of that 1.4? I really find it lovely. She's set back a little bit from a bunch of Japanese maples, and the way that they have kind of a little dreamlike. This lens has a little bit of a dreamy character, a little swirl to it, almost like some of the Viltrox lenses that I love. It's really, really nice for an affordable lens. And the way it's rendering highlights, here's overcast sky on a not so bright day. You can see we're shooting at 800th of a second, wide open 1.4. And it just is rendering details really, really nicely. There's Pike, giving me a nice Pike look, locking his eyes perfectly. I was in auto subject detection, I believe. And there was a beautiful rhododendron blooming, and I kind of looked at that with the sky and the trees around it. That's that background behind him. Look at how you just blow that away with a fast prime lens like that. But I also thought, this is a good moment to check this lens for chromatic aberration. So just to look at the 51.4, not much concern with chromatic aberration. Yeah, pretty amazing. I've done nothing but the automated lens corrections. I haven't even touched the lens correction panel, and there's not much purple fringing or green fringing. It looks really, really good. And there's Pepper down by the water. Then I jumped in with the Viltrox 135, which has just so impressed me. Even though I've been shooting with the Plena for a long time, the 135-1.8 from Viltrox is wonderful and pairs really well with this camera. I love how you can get subject background separation. It's perfect headshot lens camera combo. But it was interesting. This hairy woodpecker landed near my aunt's suet feeder for just a second. And I don't love the shot with the suet feeder. I wasn't able to get any closer. I only had that 135-1.8. I did have time just to flip to bird detect autofocus as I saw him sort of popping around there. And just in auto area autofocus, bam, it locked his eye. And, you know, this is a 24 megapixel camera. You think about cropping in tight on this, you wouldn't think you'd get such a great result, but I cropped in, it was a nice sharp frame, and I engaged Lightroom's amazing super resolution capability. You just go into the photo, enhance, super resolution, and I came away with an over 12 megapixel frame from that small crop from 24, which is pretty darn incredible. You know, 24 megapixels can get you a lot, particularly now that we have such unbelievable up-resing capabilities. All right, here's a nice shot, a little bit lower light, a pike. We're at 1000 ISO. I haven't touched it for noise reduction. Not at all. This is just straight out of the camera. Really, really nice. I love the way that 135 renders the world, and the way that the Z50 II snaps focus to selected subjects is just amazing. It finds subjects and snaps them. Pepper was walking around with Ollie, and you know, I was just looking at the fact that even at 1400 ISO, again, no noise reduction performed at all. Look at that, just beautiful. Imagine what 1400 ASA looked like in the film days. It's a whole new world, isn't it? And you know, no noise reduction at all, as I said, and such good highlight and shadow retention, even boosting the ISO up. You know, normally you get far better dynamic range at lower ISO. This camera's doing a great job. I love this sensor. This is one of the reasons why I love my Nikon ZF so much. They share this sensor. They're identical. I was looking at this as I shot it, and I thought, I could just bump my settings a little bit, bring up the aperture a little, raise my shutter speed to a 4,000th of a second, and get to that 28,000 ISO threshold, you know, that I talk about. I set this camera to 20,000 ISO for its maximum auto ISO for a reason, all right? You take a look at this, is straight out of camera, and there's noise, right? It's a sharp, well-captured image, well exposed. You know, it's right up to the edge, exposed to the right, but not quite off the edge. So I took this image and I edited it just slightly, but ran it through Lightroom Classic's denoise. I went into Enhance again and ran denoise on it. And take a look what you can do with just a few button clicks. Again, you go into that photo, actually in the new version of Lightroom Classic, the latest update, in the details panel and develop. Right here, you jump into develop and you take a look at details, and right here you've got denoise. I ran denoise, created a DNG of that noisy raw file at 20,000 ISO, and boom, you know, here we are. Look at that. That's what I'm saying. You can easily use images at 20,000 ISO. Maybe I need to even bump up my thoughts to 25,600 or even more. I mean, it's really incredible what the software technology is doing for us. And yet another reason why we should always be shooting in RAW. You can't do this with a JPEG. So from this to that, boom. And then just a couple of nice portrait shots of Ollie with that 135 showing off the combination. And just how beautiful the subject detection is, and what a beautiful long prime like that can do with a camera paired with spectacular subject detection. So Z50 II, nothing wrong with this camera. All right, so there you go. You can see I've had a lot of fun just running around with this camera. I mean, just even running over to my aunt's house yielded enough images to talk about all the reasons why I like this camera, as well as this 51.4 lens. I'm gonna link this camera and this lens, as well as that Viltrox 135 1.8, which I reviewed last week. You can see that video right here. But I'm gonna put links to all these in this video's full description. And you can always run and see all the gear that I use and recommend over at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Those links help me out. I really appreciate all of you considering using them, and I'm gonna put a link to those right here just to click in the video too. The 51.4 was a real surprise to me. You know, I'd read people that liked it. I thought, a sub $500 fast 50 prime, how good could it be? But it's a surprisingly good little lens. If I didn't have the Voigtlander 51.0 and have such a fun time with the challenge of manually focusing it, using the cheating-like manual focus subject detection aids that all the new Nikon cameras have, including the Z5 II and the Z50 II, it would be a lens that I'd strongly consider purchasing for myself. As it is, I love my ZF and my Z9, and those two work beautifully hand in hand for me alongside the Z50 II in scenarios. I'm shooting this video with the Z50 II as we speak. The Z50 II doesn't make sense for me to keep, but I think it makes sense for a lot of people. You know, it has all the crazy modern tech that they keep packing into every single Z camera that's launched since the Z9. It's got, you know, it's got pre-release capture where you can hold the shutter button halfway down in C15 or C30 mode in those high-speed continuous JPEG modes, and it will be recording a series of images in a loop over the top until you press the button, and it backs up and captures before you press the button until a little ways after you press the button. You can program those parameters. I talk about that in the setup video. It's got built-in focus stacking. It's got red overlay mode where when you're out doing night shooting with this camera, it'll display everything from the captured images to the menus to the view all in red so that you don't blow your night vision. It's got starlight view where when you're working with a fast lens and you're out there doing Milky Way or night photography on a moonless night, no lights whatsoever, you can see the landscape. You can compose in camera. You can focus on stars. It's an incredible little machine. Who it's for, I think, is anyone who's on a bit more of a budget but wants into the full frame world and they want a high quality 24 megapixel sensor. They don't have the budget or they don't care about the speed coming out of the stacked sensor from the Z6 III. If you take a look over at the website Photons to Photos, just Google that, check it out. If you run over there, you can look at the specs on the sensors from read noise at ISO settings to dynamic range at ISO settings charts. And you can overlay different cameras at the same time on those charts with a checkbox list on the upper right. You'll see that the Z5 II and the ZF are identical when it comes. It's the same sensor, tuned exactly the same way. You'll see the Z6 III has slightly less dynamic range, slightly worse high ISO noise performance. It's slight, but it's just slightly less high ISO noise performance and dynamic range than the sensor in these two cameras. What the Z6 III gets you is speed, speed, speed. It's fast. It's the perfect backup to the Z8, Z9 for action shooters that are out there that really care about how many frames they're capturing, how big that buffer is. It's writing to a CF Express card. You know, it's fast, fast, fast. This camera writes to 2 SD cards. Better than the ZF's single SD card and micro SD card. It's got tons of button customizations. It's got user modes that let you instantly flip into a whole bank of, or a whole set of settings for a given shooting circumstance, particularly action and wildlife. That's wonderful. If you're in a knockaround mode and all of a sudden there's a spectacular bird in flight, you can just flip. You're in all of your action autofocus and capture settings. You know, it really is a powerful little tool in the hand. And these days, Nikon has affordable lenses to go with it that rock, you know, like this 51.4 for less than $500, like the 180 to 600 if you're really into birds and wildlife. They've got some all-in-one lenses for people that are looking to never switch lenses. They've got the 28 to 400 and the 24 to 200 that are both more budget-oriented, sort of all-in-one zooms, and they perform better than you'd ever imagine a lens like that performing in the F-mount days. I've had workshop participants in Scotland and other places bringing the 28 to 400 as their all-in-one travel lens, and I was quite surprised at the results. You know, personally, I love the 24 to 120 as kind of a knock around, do most of what I need to do lens on my Z8, Z9, ZF, and that's a great pairing with this camera as well. I'd strongly consider this 51.4. You saw the results. I think that the Viltrox 135 1.8 is an amazing portrait, sort of long, sniper-like lens for you to do candids when people have no idea what's going on at events or family gatherings. Street shooting at night. It's a really, really incredible lens, and it pairs beautifully with this camera. This camera is capable. Great sensor, and there are affordable options to pair it with. Now, who do I think maybe shouldn't consider this camera? I think people who are really, really on a budget and focused on shooting distant subjects. You know, if you're out at the air shows, if birds in flight are your thing, if you're out shooting wildlife at a distance, you know, safari style, then I think the Z50 II is something you should strongly consider. That smaller sensor makes the same focal length lens fill the frame more easily. You know, it's cropping in on the projection from that lens, so that if you were to buy the 180 to 600 on a Z50 II, it would act as if it was a 270 to 900, you know, as far as filling that 20 megapixel frame. You could crop to APS-C mode, to DX mode with this camera, but you'd have less than 10 megapixels of capture remaining. You know, it's just a different kind of game. And for the Z50 II, for those on a budget, you can get the camera and the 16 to 50 and 50 to 250, which are both really good kit lenses that give you the equivalent of 24 to 375 millimeters, all for $1,300. That's $400 less than this body alone. So there are people for whom I think the Z50 II makes sense, and it does all of those crazy things like pre-release capture and focus shift shooting and, you know, the starlight mode and red overlay. It does all that same kind of stuff. It's not going to be as great in low light hand holding. Its noise performance isn't as great, but for long lens work, it's really something. And for the amount of money that they charge for it, it's quite incredible. You know, I think the Z5 II is a great camera for a lot of people. If I didn't have the ZF, I'd be keeping it. All right, so that's my final take on it. I think it's fantastic. I've got, again, that full setup video. Make sure you check that out. My settings are uploadable over on my free download site. That's all linked in this video's full description. I want to thank everybody for watching. Hit me up in the comments. If you have a Z5 II, I'll bet you already love it. If you have other questions, email me, hit me in the comments. You know, those user interactions, the community interactions are what drive the content of this channel, so I pay close attention and I appreciate all of them. Thanks so much for watching. I hope everybody out there is staying safe and staying creative, and we'll see you next week.